Hi guys, Dan Pickar here with EASTMANS Bowhunting Journal. Today we're going to look at shot placement on big game animals. I think we can all agree that a slightly quartering away or a quartering away shot could perhaps be the best angle that a bow hunter could ask for, with the hopes of driving that arrow up into the far shoulder and penetrating both lungs, if not the heart. In this video, we're going to analyze what has worked for me, what I've seen over the years, anatomy of elk, bears, and we'll look at specific scenarios of what has worked and what has exactly happened during some of the shots I've taken over the years. First, this is a high country deer hunt, and this buck spooks out to 50 yards. I used a little Kentucky windage and I shot. Now I held down on his brisket with the anticipation that he was going to duck down and jump the string since he was alert.
Got him right in the heart.
And you can see that's exactly what happened. Right when I shot, that buck heard that bow go off and he dipped down. But you can see that arrow was going right down for his elbow and he ducked down and was taken off, and that's where it hit him right through the elbow. Now luckily that was a heart shot and that deer went 80 yards and piled up. Heart shots always win. I also like that because that's a slightly quartering away shot too. That's a high odds shot. Now next we have a situation where I was sneaking up on this axis buck. It was 61 yards. He had no idea I was there. So my aiming point, if you look, is offside front shoulder. So that's really not that far in front of the hip on the near side, but I want to bury that arrow into the far shoulder. So I take my time and I settle and I hit, and you can see very poor penetration. That buck runs off with that arrow sticking far out of him. You can tell that this buck, he dropped, he ducked the string, he heard the bow go off, and that broadhead hit him right in the scapula, right in that shoulder blade, and you can see it kind of kicked down and that broadhead rode up on the scapula. Now that shot was a little farther right than what I would have wanted it to be. So if I was about 4 inches to the left, that would have been a dead buck for sure. That just goes to show you what game of inches it is that we're playing out there and how imperative it is to hit our mark every time. And we're gonna go right into a Wyoming elk hunt. I spent 45 minutes at the base of this hill watching these cows feed, and eventually I got my opportunity, and this bull fed through my shooting lane where I had rehearsed the shot. As he fed through, I gave him a little cow call, and he's slightly quartering away. This is a nice angle for shooting an elk. But you can see on the impact, I hit him a little far back. I was about 5 or 6 inches in front of that hip line on the near side. But that arrow went all the way through, zipped right through. I actually didn't even find the arrow. The exit was about mid-body. You can see the exit there. This right here is the expandable cut, and then this little notch right here is the cut on contact cut. So big holes, elk don't go far. It's a quick kill. That's exactly what we're looking for. This elk went 60 yards from where I shot him, and he died within eyesight. And this is the 6th elk that's happened with this broadhead. And that's why I like this broadhead. I've never been a fan of expandables for elk. I just don't like it, but I like the hybrid. Got an inch fixed, and then you have that expandable. I'm shooting a setup. I have 91 foot-pounds of kinetic energy for reference there. That's enough to kill a Cape buffalo. There's absolutely no reason I shouldn't be shooting a big head like this. I'll shoot a head like this at elk with that big cut any day over a completely fixed head. These have just proven to me over the years to kill so much faster. All right, guys, here's the exit. You can see that in that rib meat. I left it there so you could see I missed a rib on the exit. And check out that hole. So you can see this muscle. It's really thin. It has a lot of fibers crisscrossing. That's the diaphragm. This hole in the diaphragm is like the size of a golf ball. So that shot went through the stomach, up forward through the liver, which lays right underneath the diaphragm. It's right here. And this popped the diaphragm. Now this is a huge hole. When that diaphragm pops, it's game over. It deflates the chest cavity. And you can see, let's take a look at this lobe here. Get this rib out of the way. Be careful with these bones. That was kind of dumb because you can get cut on these sharp bones. So just be careful. Look at this. See that? So that's the grave digger hole right there that was laying right on the diaphragm. So it's the back of the lung. Gotta love that quartering away shot. You're better off to be back than you are forward. And it did its job. So there you go. There's your anatomy. You can see the chest is full of blood. Here's the heart right here. Just laying right on top of the brisket. Obviously it's underneath all that blood, but big old lung deflated. So that lung, when it was inflated, was back all the way up there. You can still kind of see, that's just the tail of the lung. So that's one lung, but that body cavity is what saved it. So. Okay, so that was a good example of a quartering away shot on that Wyoming bull. Let's jump in to my other Wyoming bull a few years ago. He came over the ridge, bugling in my face at 9 yards, and I didn't really waste any time shooting him. You can see that bull is pretty quartering towards. Now, hindsight, I would and should have waited for that bull to walk down to me a little more to get a better angle on him. I got a little excited, but I picked my spot and I hit him a little high, as you can see, but it went through that lobe of the lung and it buried into the far back hip. So it went through the lung, crisscrossed the diaphragm, through the guts and into the hip with that gravedigger broadhead. And most guys might not think that's a good shot, but once again, you crisscross that diaphragm, that bull isn't gonna go anywhere. And as long as you can hold tight to the shoulder and your entrance is tight to the shoulder, you're gonna get the same result shooting that animal quartering towards as you would if that bull was quartering away from you. So never overlook that quartering towards shot as long as you can keep it tight to a shoulder. And I watched that bull die within eyesight, maybe not even 90 yards away. It wasn't that far. So here's another good example. This is 4 years ago. I called this bull in and he came up to 20 yards and I gave him a little whistle and he's slightly quartering towards. Now I sent this shot a little high. It was a little above center, but in reality, not very far above center, but it still hit that lobe of the lung, and that arrow exited mid-body or just in front of the hip on the far side, and I actually never found that arrow. That arrow zipped right through. And that's with a gravedigger broadhead once again, and that was a Victory 350 VAP, I believe. I think that hunting arrow is 385 grains maybe. That's a really light arrow. But as you can see, if you don't hit any major bones, it's still going to cut through an elk like a hot knife through butter. Now let's move right into this antelope hunt. This was in 2017 in Wyoming, and I believe this buck was somewhere 73 yards, 71 yards, something like that. And he's quartering towards me once again, and I'm shooting a Night Fury Extreme on this antelope, and this is a 2-blade expandable 2 1/4 inch cut. So this is a giant cut broadhead. And with antelope, I just want to create the biggest wound, the biggest hole that I can possibly create, because number one, they're thin skinned, they're light boned, and they are pretty weak. And so my goal with an antelope, just like it is with a bear, I like to shoot a big cut diameter broadhead and create as much devastation as I possibly can. Now, there's a lot of different schools of thought on shooting an animal frontal. I think this is probably the most dangerous angle if you don't know what you're doing or if you're shooting from a far distance. My rule for me personally, if I'm going to shoot a frontal shot on an elk or anything smaller, is 20 yards or less, and I have plenty of time. The kill zone is very small, and if that animal, especially an elk, moves a little bit and you're off by just 2 inches, you can go from a clean kill to a disastrous wound and unrecovered. So I really want to caution you to be very careful when you're shooting a frontal shot on an animal. And in my book, I keep it 20 yards, maybe 15 yards or less, because it's just too risky. This next shot is a mule deer laying down. I've never shot an animal laying down, and I decided to try it in this scenario because I felt I had a good exposure of his vitals, kind of quartering away from me, and the ability to drive that arrow up into his body cavity. Once again, I was shooting the Night Fury Extreme on this buck, 2¼ inch cut. This is a big cut, and I felt confident that I could make a clean kill. But the kicker is your kill zone is probably the size of a softball, maybe a little bit bigger. And this buck was 40 yards, and I had all the time in the world to make a shot. And it looks, I mean, you can't really even tell what the hit was like other than I hit him where I wanted to at normal motion. But as we slow it down, you can see at just over 40 yards, this buck had already started to move and get up before the arrow actually impacted him. I gave him some time and I walked down there and he was piled up. But lots of damage, that 2¼ inch cut. I don't think I would take this shot again because this buck moved so much before that arrow even got there. Just a risky deal. I don't like that at all. It worked out for me, but it could easily have gone the other way. Here's kind of another interesting situation. This is a Wyoming bull from 2016. He stopped behind this juniper, and I had this little notch right to behind his shoulder where his kill zone is. I took my time and I shot. I think this was 35 yards, and you can see arrow flight was perfect, but I nicked that juniper. You can actually see the juniper twig blast off the juniper where I actually nicked it with the broadhead. That bull was right behind the juniper, so that broadhead didn't open. It didn't cause any deflection or anything like that. I kind of got lucky. I wasn't aiming to shoot the juniper, but if I was off by much more, could have lost that bull. But as you can see, as that bull runs away, that arrow is placed perfectly behind the elbow, about 4 inches behind the crease, but I only got half penetration. And what happened is I shot this bull with a gravedigger once again, and the expandable portion of the blades stopped on the far ribs. I split the ribs perfectly on the far side, and that arrow did not pass through. Now let's go right into my British Columbia moose. This bull came into 14 yards, and he stood there for 1 minute and 30 seconds frontal. Obviously I don't have a shot. I'm drawn, and the nose of that moose is over his vitals, so a frontal isn't even an option. Otherwise, I probably would have taken a frontal shot if this was a bull elk or something, because this is 14 yards, dead still, and I had plenty of time to make my shot. So I knew ahead of time that my only shot was gonna be when this bull turned to go. And luckily, it kind of was like a slow motion wheel. He turned really slow, and it kind of gave me the heads up that I needed, and slipping it in behind a rib and driving that arrow forward. And you can see that's exactly what happened. At first, I was a little nervous by this shot because it was far back. But once again, I'm shooting a 500 grain arrow, and I shot him with a 125 gravedigger. It hit him just in front of the last rib, and it was poking out the other side about the 6th rib back. And so it's a far back hit. It's liver, diaphragm, back of lungs. But even with that shot and that arrow not passing through, this bull went about 200 yards, left good blood, and I recovered him easily.